Yeah. I can feel free. Okay.
Okay, hello. My name's Jason Grinblat. I'm half of the core team of Freehold Games. We work on a roguelike called Caves of Qud. So with that out of the way, let's read some text written by robots. Damn robots. Okay. Okay, so those were generated by Markov text generators, and I love Markov text generators. I think they're hilarious. I love how they generate sentences that would never be written by a human. I love how they produce well-formed English that's sort of semantically nonsensical, and to make sense of it, your brain sort of imposes a context on it, and you have to kind of extract this meaning that the generator clearly didn't intend. And the way they work, they're pretty simple. They essentially rearrange text from a source corpus of original text. So for example, if I could go back here, this is from a corpus of the Puppet documentation. Puppet is system administration software combined with the assorted works of H.P. Lovecraft. Same with this one. And then this one is a bunch of LinkedIn recruiter emails combined with personal anecdotes of drug use from Arrowhead.com. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a bit about Markov text generators. They're based on these things called Markov chains, which are probabilistic models developed by a mathematician named Markov. So I really love Markov text generators, like I said, and for a while now I've been wanting to fit one into the roguelike I work on, Caves of Qud, and so today I'm going to tell you about a design experiment where I did just that. So on our quest toward a procedural roguelike, I'm going to talk today a little bit about the role of knowledge in Caves of Qud, how Markov text generators work. They're really easy, so I'll show you how to create one. How I actually generated the procedural books in Qud, and then I'll talk a bit about moving actually beyond just having a fun generator and trying to weave a game mechanic around it. Okay, so Caves of Qud. So for those of you who don't know, I know some of you do, but for those of you who don't know, Caves of Qud is a open world, far future roguelike, kind of in the tradition of new wave science fiction. The tagline is chiseled through layers of thousand-year-old civilizations. So if you could imagine with me for a second, you're a lore seeker in a wild and fractured world. You've just arrived on the outskirts of this land called Qud, where jungles strangle chrome steeples and ruined archways to the earth. It's a wild place, but you have heard tell that there are some groups that are trying to resurrect knowledge back from the seeds of the past. So there's an albino ape who's the mayor of a mushroom village, and he has a rare collection of books. There are the bear-thrumites. They're a clan of cave bear tinkers who are trying to meticulously reclaim the technologies of the past. But greater than all, there's a faction of machine worshippers deep in the salt desert who are building a cathedral, and they're going to found a library. So you travel to that library, spurred on by your pursuit of knowledge of the world in the past. You travel there. So I really wanted the library to be like this collection of texts from across the ages where, the authors are mostly gone now, so the context is missing. Things like transliteration and lingual drift have rendered most of these texts indecipherable or sort of half decipherable. I really wanted it to be like the experience of reading text where you don't recognize half of the glyphs. You hear stories of things that you'd only heard about as myths as a child, perhaps. The meaning is fractured and fleeting. So I realized that this is a perfect fit for Markov generated text. So Markov chains, like I was saying, they're a probabilistic model for describing a series of states. The next state only depends on the current state, not all of the previous states. And this short memory property of the chain is what allows it to like walk your corpus of text and produce these kind of novel, interesting things. So in the context of text generators specifically, the states are basically sequences of words. And as I mentioned, the chain is generated from a corpus of text, and the corpus can be anything from like several books, like for example, in some of those first examples, like many stories by H.P. Lovecraft and the whole suite of puppet documentation. But the corpus could also be just as short as a single sentence. So if we look at this sentence, for example, the cat isn't sleeping, but the cat is definitely not listening. I'm going to show you how to build a chain from this sentence, which is our corpus. So the first thing to know, the chain is basically built one piece at a time, and each piece is called an n-gram. An n-gram is essentially just a series of n units, in this case words. I'm also going to I'm going to call it a prefix because I'm going to talk about it in the context of the word that immediately follows it, which is the suffix. The number of words that are in your n-gram, that's called the order, and it's a property of the chain. Basically, you can vary the order in order to produce in your generator more predictable or less predictable text. Like if your order is great enough, then you'll just reproduce the original corpus. So for the chain I built for Caves of Qud, and for this example, I'm just going to use order 2. So basically, the way that you build the chain is you look at the first n-gram in the sentence, and you start to build a dictionary from it. So you insert it into a dictionary. As the value is a list of the suffix that follows it. So in this case, the first n-gram is the cat. The word that immediately follows it is isn't, so we add that. And then we just kind of increment through the sentence. So the next prefix is can't is it. The suffix is sleeping, so we add that as the value of the key value pair in the dictionary. We keep going. Isn't sleeping. Notice that I actually kept the comma there. The punctuation is sort of important. And you keep iterating through until you get to the cat. Now, the cat we actually had already entered as a key in our dictionary. So what we do is we append the value, the new suffix, to the list that we had been storing. So now the value is the list containing 2 suffixes, isn't and is. And then we keep iterating through the sentence. We're building the chain one step at a time until we get to the last prefix and the suffix that follows it. And then we have our Markov chain. So when we actually want to generate text from it, what we do is we pick a prefix. So let's pick the cat. And then we essentially, this is where the actual generation comes in. We just randomly choose a suffix from the list that we created. So in this case, we're going to ran from the first or second element. Let's say we pick is randomly. And then we repeat the process. We sort of increment forward and repeat the process. So cat is, we look up cat is in the dictionary. We get definitely. And then since the rest of these keys only have one value, it's deterministic. We know what the sentence is going to look like. So we end up producing the cat is definitely not listening as a new sentence. So that's how Markov chains works. They're really interesting, or they're really simple, but the way they're made interesting is by clever construction of the corpus. So Caves of Qud already has books. We have a concept of book. There are mostly static books. There are things like journals, parables, sacred texts. There are objects in the game. You can walk up to them. You can interact with them. Corpus colis, right? This is the title of this book. You can look at them like you could look at the description of any object in the game. The one other thing you can do with a book is you can read them. So we have this read menu where, you read an in-game book. If you're familiar with like the Elder Scrolls series and their in-game books, it's inspired by that essentially. There are multiple pages. You can page through them. So those are what books look like in Caves of Qud. Like I said, they're mostly static. Some of them have some small procedural elements, like this book, for example, is a book of cures, and there are diseases in the game, and if you get one, you have to, the cures are sort of procedurally generated, so you have to go and reference this book rather than just looking it up on a Caves of Qud wiki. So when I started to think about building the corpus for Caves of Qud, Caves of Qud has a lot of text in the game. So if I use those in-game books that I talked about, there were probably about close to 20 or something. I also use the NPC dialogue. I used quest text, every description on every object in the game, every description on every skill, and actually the Caves of Qud help files too. So it like produces this weird sort of meta reality in the generated books. So all told, it's something like 45,000 words, which is like of the order of a small novel. But then, I kind of wanted to play around with some other texts to add to the corpus. So I looked at public domain stuff on Project Gutenberg, and I ended up finding like a couple things that were really, I thought, relevant or that fit well with the Caves of Qud text. So there's this book, The Machinery of the Universe, Mechanical Concepts of Physical Phenomenon. It's a physics book from the 19th century. It's written by Amos Emerson Dolbear, which is not a procedurally generated name, as it turns out. Zoological Mythology or the Legends of Animals. It's kind of like a, animal myth book. It was also written from the 19th century. I combined these, and I chose these because, I basically took excerpts of these such that they would about equal the length of the Caves of Qud text, so that the Caves of Qud text would form about half of the corpus. So the way I actually generate text, once the chain is built, while I'm building the chain, I also keep a list of all the first n-grams that start sentences. So basically, I have a list of phrases that are like eligible candidates to start sentences. Like, so for the original example, I would record the cat in a list separate from the actual Markov chain. So to generate a sentence, all I do is I choose an n-gram from that list at random. I walk the chain until I hit a period. And what I mean by walking the chain is that I just generate text like I showed you in the example, and I keep generating text until I hit a period. There's some other condition, like if it generates 50 words without hitting a period, it'll terminate, but that actually very rarely happens. To generate a paragraph, very simply, I just generate 3 to 6 sentences. And then to generate a book, we generate 8 to 30 paragraphs. And we have some nice auto formatting for the books for our static books, so we just rely on that to produce nice looking text. So this is an example of a procedurally generated book. It's 6 pages, it just all comes from the corpus. I'll just read the first line here. For ages, the civilizations of the cloneling are comprised of skull-sized hexagonal pyramids of polished chrome. Some examples I like. Candlelight sigil is a river just north of the glacial rivers flowing over the bones of a canyon dweller. Okay, what's this? Press L and scroll around to revel at the black blood for their children's return to the idol of a Borokoru and skulking around it and built a temple there. And then some of them are particularly poetic, like down here, like Tritus, like Indris, drinks the water azure, flaking silver of water, but there is a quasar of red metal that gently undulates when seen by day and gloomy by night. The sun goes round and round amidst the worlds. I really like this. It was a particularly fun experience to see it generate text from the corpus that I had written. Because, and I started to think about this question, who's authoring the text, me or the generator? At GDC this year, I had the chance to talk with Emily Short. She's like a person in the interactive fiction and procedural text world. And she was talking about this fictional travel guide she had written called The Annals of Paragraphs. It's really cool if you want to check it out. There's a link here. And she had described it as like a collaboration between her and the generator. It's a story she wrote with the machine, which I thought was kind of like a nice way to put that. So generating titles. Generating titles is actually harder because there's some extra structure in them. So when I generate text, the text that I'm generating, I want to look basically just like the text in the corpus as far as like grammatically. So there's nothing I really have to do. But like if I just generate a random fragment of text as a title, it looks kind of bad. So you get a bad title like At the Foot of a Sickly Tree Until, right? It's about the right length of a title, maybe 3 to 6 words, but it's just kind of makes a bad title. So what I started to do, my first idea was to design sort of templates, title-like templates, and then walk through the chain to fill them in with real text. So as an example of a template would be like the blank of blank, like the winds of change, or on blank, as in on sentimentality. These seem like, things that templates that would make good titles to me. So I started to do this, and I wrote like some tools that would like match prefixes against my templates, and then go from there, generate the text from there. And it was working okay, but it was generating pretty good titles. I did notice though there was a bug in the code, and it was generating a bunch of titles that didn't match the template, but they were all really good titles. And so that gave me the second idea, which is actually a much better idea, which is just to generate a fragment of text, like I originally said, by walking the chain 2 to 5 times, and then just shaving off undesirable words from the beginning and the end. And the undesirable words are things like were, though, them. Those are undesirable starting words. Undesirable ending words, things like this, were, every. It's really not that many words, because it's things like, conjunctions and pronouns. So you can just keep like a static list of 30 or whatever words that you want to shave off the end. And then, you produce a good title. So at the foot of a sickly tree. That's kind of an interesting title. It's just the same title as the bad title with until taken off the end. So that worked pretty well. Here are some examples of titles: an advanced rate, an arm's length from a priest, exclamation point. Some examples I particularly like. This one's pretty good. I kind of want that book in real life. Right. Okay, so, if anyone who's worked with procedural generation, you know that there's this danger of producing stuff which, while it might be, technically differentiated, it's sort of samey, right? It has no characteristic that really perceptibly makes it interesting. So, there's a computational creativity researcher, Kate Compton. She calls this like lack of characterfulness. Characterful being this quality where there's some like aesthetic thing going on that humans were able to like sort of perceive an interesting difference of it. So to make these books a little more characterful, I did a couple things. Like 10% of the time, I just include an author's note or editor's note at the top of the first page in the text. And all an author's note or editor's note it's the words author's note and then just a randomly generated sentence. So you get something like this: editor's note. 5% of the time I generate a tome, which is just 10 times as long as a normal book. That's all it is. And then 20% of the time I add some modifiers to the titles. So there are things like first edition or, nth edition to the end, or like colon unabridged. Or this next one's my personal favorite title. Okay, so, with that, moving beyond from there until actually, like, I really wanted to evoke the experience of, like, the player coming in and researching a tattered tome for some information that's actually relevant in the world of Caves of Qud. So, I had this idea that there's some procedural parts of the game, obviously Caves of Qud. So I thought it would be interesting to sort of generate lore about those procedural elements and then inject them into the Markov chain, so that when the generator's walking through the chain to produce text, it'll occasionally hit upon these secrets. So what I chose as a kind of proof of concept is the location of this artifact pistol called the Ruin of House Eisner. Basically, we place it in a random map on Qud surface. So there are 18,000 maps on Qud surface. Basically, here's the world map again. The world map is 18 by 25 tiles, and each tile is composed of 3 by 3 maps. So the pistol's randomly placed there, like, it's sort of a needle in a haystack situation if you were to actually try to exhaustively search in-game for the pistol. So what I end up doing is I did a little bit of frequency analysis on the chain, and I made this, I think it's kind of obvious to me now, but I actually had to think about this a bit before I stumbled upon this observation, that the frequency of a prefix in the source text corresponds very closely to its frequency in generated text, at least by the way that I'm generating the text. So I looked at some of the most common prefixes, things like in the, with the, of the to the. And if you hang on to that for a moment, I'll show you what I did with it. So I ended up writing a secret generator that will generate procedural secrets about the location of that pistol. The secrets took the form of distances from like important static landmarks in Caves of Qud. So things like 8 parasangs north of the 6-day stilt, east of Joppa, some 6 parasangs. And parasang is a unit of measurement, which is roughly equal to 1 world map tile. So what I did was I generated the secrets such that they were prefaced by one of those highly occurring prefixes like in the or to the, and so they might look something like, to the masterwork pistol I buried east of Joppa some 6 parasangs. Then I actually just took those secrets that were generated, I put them in the corpus, and then I added some special processing rules to the chain builder so that it wouldn't chop up those secrets. It would actually just consume them as like a whole unit. So you end up getting something like this. I'll just read this fragment of the sentence. The ambrosia which belongs to the other, which gives different properties to the famous revolver ruin of House Eisner, which I hid somewhere north of Joppa, about 12 parasangs. So a player can read the tomes and get a north-south secret and get an east-west secret and sort of be able to cross-reference them and narrow down the location of the pistol to one of 9 maps. So it's actually this process of researching where it might be through this kind of archaic text. So back to that idea of our frequency analysis. So we know a few things. We know the size of an average book just from the way I generate it. It's pretty simple to calculate that. We know how often one of our hooks appears, and those hooks are just those prefixes, the ones that we know about, where we know how often they appear in the books because we know how often they appear in the source corpus text. And we know the number of suffixes per hook. So for each hook, with the in our chain, it'll have its list of suffixes, and we know how many there are. So with those variables, we can inject a number of secrets that will give us a desired rate of secrets per book. So yeah, we can control the frequency by inserting n secrets. You could do a little math. It just turns out that n is the desired number of secrets times the average number of suffixes per sequence over the amount of hooks per book. And so I ended up deciding on 1 secret every 4 books. I felt like that just felt like a good number. But obviously that, it's dependent on what your goal is for the secrets. So some future things that I want to think about. So I want to add more fluidity to the secret generation. So right now, because it needs to be well-formed English, I have to write the generator in such a way to generate good English out of the secret. And so it's kind of each secret has to be sort of manually coded around in that sense. And I would like there's all sort of procedural secrets in Qud that are generated each game. I would like some more generalized way to basically surface them as English text so that they could be added to the corpus. I'd like to experiment with more corpora, adding some more interesting books that I find that I think would be good fits to Qud, or doing things like varying the what composes the corpus per maybe bookshelves. You have semi-thematic bookshelves. And I think it would be interesting, obviously, to do something a little more interesting with generating paragraphs rather than just end sentences. I mean, end sentences works pretty well for the use case that I'm describing, which is sort of a ancient text that you kind of know is going to be a little nonsensical. If you wanted to do something a little more constrained, you would need another approach. Okay, are there any questions? Thank you. Yes. Yeah, it'd be interesting. I mean, okay. Yeah, sorry about that. So the question was referencing data corruption in one of the early slides. Had I thought about doing any post-processing to replace characters or anything to make the text look maybe a little like corrupted data? Yeah, I mean, that that's something that I think would be cool. It actually happened accidentally because one of the texts was using Unicode characters, and like so I had to like just remove them, and it just produced. I kind of like just liked what it looked like when you just remove those characters. So yeah, I think that's definitely a good direction you could go. I hadn't really got that far just for it being a proof of concept, but yeah. Yes.
On the markup chain side, have you tried doing keeping the count of how many times a suffix follows a prefix, and then using that when choosing where to go, like weighted?
It actually.
Okay. Ruins the text because it gets too sensical.
Yeah. So the question was, when you're generating the Markov chain, do you do have you thought about doing anything like keeping track of the frequency of if you hit the same suffix again to keep track of the frequency? And that's actually, I don't mention this, but that actually is how the chain works. So like in the very naive implementation that I was showing you, like when you're just inserting to the list, if you get to the same suffix again, you actually just put it in the list again. And so you maintain the frequency there. And that's my understanding is how most of the Markov text generators work. If you don't do that, I think the text actually becomes too nonsensical. Or what I think will happen is that, obviously the text it generates isn't perfect. As you saw, you'll occasionally generate some stuff that's not, very often generate stuff that's not well-formed English, or that will have a well-formed fragment, but the sentence as a whole isn't. My feeling is that if you do that and you just flatten out the frequencies, I think you would run into that issue a lot more. You would generate a lot more fragments and sentences that are not really well formed. So it works good as it is, where you're actually maintaining the frequency of the suffixes. Yeah. Yeah.
When do you generate the text? Is it when they pick up a book, or when they enter the room, or when they open the page?
Yeah. So right. Okay. So we build the corpus when we. Oh, okay. So the question. Sorry. The question was when do we generate the text? So. We generate the corpus when we compile, and then we don't actually generate the books until they open a bookshelf, and then we don't actually generate the text until they open until they open an actual book. So the idea being that I knew that this was kind of like, not everyone is going to love this, right? I knew that I didn't want to make this critical path stuff. It's kind of tucked away into a library in the corner of the map that I wanted ambitious players to go do. If they feel like doing some research, they could do that. And so, yeah, we do it very lazily because we know a lot of people are just going to blaze by and be like, whatever. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
One thing that's jarring is the tenses. In Markov chains generally, have you ever thought of just running a grammar fix on it as post-process?
Yeah. No, that's a good. So the question was that Markov text generators, the tense in the generated text is often sort of jarring and incorrect, and so you could do like a post-processing pass to fix the grammar. Yeah, it's a good idea. I mean, I didn't get that far, unfortunately, but it's on the list of things that, like, if you wanted to generate tighter text, that you would do. Yeah.
Sorry, have you tried using Markov chains to generate other stuff that's not text? I've seen it used for Babel, but I'm wondering about dungeon rooms or mythos or.
Yeah, I mean, has anyone in the room tried that? I haven't personally. Squirrel has. It's awesome for everything. That's the answer.
Truly amazing.
Yeah.
No, honestly, cooking.
Yes.
There is a procedural recipe bot out there.
Yeah.
There are all sorts of bizarre and wonderful Markov bots in this universe.
Yeah.
They're very useful because they take any collection or sequence and reproduce a collection or sequence that matches stochastically. So that if you have any kind of collection, you can generate a stochastic relationship between them, and then generate a second collection. So sunny and rainy days, for instance, right? So you can imagine any kind of sequence or collection where you want to stochastically replicate it without reproducing an identical one, and use it there. And there are a lot of applications.
You can feed it Mario levels, and it will create Mario levels. Yeah. New ones.
Yeah, it's. I mean, in particular, it's because of the way they work. They're reconstructing from they're only going to produce sequences they've seen. It's just the order of when you combine them, it actually produces really novel things, somewhat surprisingly. Yeah.
I just want to say, for me, the obvious in hindsight but brilliant step here is using your own lore
as the corpus, like, 'cause then it will fit, it will make sense, it will reference things, and so I think that's really.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of like we had a ton of lore, like we had all this, we had like a short novel's worth of text to do something with, and that's, I mean, I love to write, so I'll just go in and write an in-game book, like, because it's fun. So it's interesting to get the extra mileage out of it, and then also to kind of like Qud's a sort of crazy world, you know, and this is something I've thought about is that Qud's a sort of crazy world where we're okay with a bunch of inanity, like there's this sort of absurdist kind of tone. Which fits well with the generator, right? Because it gives the generator room to be wonky, and no one's gonna like ask too many questions. Like, you're gonna be able to interpret in a way like, okay, like a sentient goat probably wrote that text. Who cared? You know, if you wanted to do something a little more constrained or serious in tone, I think that would be difficult. I'm interested if people have done that, use generators in more constrained ways. But yeah, anything else, Tom?
The work that I did with that included being a two-way Markov chain. In other words, it builds probabilities backwards and forwards from prefix and suffix.
Okay.
Which I used to not have to mark beginnings of sentences as special case use. I just picked a word in the middle and then went backwards and forwards.
Okay.
Was that something you considered?
No. Only because, like, when I was doing some, you know, yeah, when I had learned about Markov chains, that's how I assumed I would write it. Is that it would go backwards and forwards. But most of the chains that I looked up were just use the prefixes and then built the suffixes. So I just started there, and it produced pretty good text. Like, again, like with more time, I would like to experiment with that. But yeah, I mean, the simple rule of record the beginning sentence prefixes and then stop when you hit a period works pretty well. So yeah.
So Markov chains, the way you described it with text work, I guess in one dimension, it's a chain. But I was thinking about it in terms of like dungeon map generation would be more like a lattice, like you have to go in 2 dimensions. So I was wondering if anyone knows anything about it.
It's called the Markov web. Yeah.
So do you look at like overlapping like 2x2 tiles? Like how does that work?
It's basically just using context of like, when I have something to the north of me and this to the west of me, I'm likely to be either this or that. But it has to flow one way across, well, either diagonally across the map or something.
Yeah, I think you can because it's just a state. So if you have like an arrangement of tiles, that's your state, and then you just have to choose a way to produce the next one. So maybe it's the next row, and then you look again and then, you know, iterate that way.
For filling in, like, if you have some gap, you're like, fill in something appropriate here, it can do that contextually really well, like from the outside in.
I think you had a question?
Yeah, so this was an experiment. Like, at what point did you decide it was worthwhile enough and not just nonsense to put in the game?
Well, yeah. So the question was, this is an experiment. At what point, or implicitly, have you decided that this is worthwhile enough to put it in the game? Our methodology for Qud in particular is sort of just like to put in things that we think interesting and like kind of tuck them away if they're not interesting enough. It's just because Caves of Qud in particular is kind of a grab bag of a lot of ideas. So we're comfortable with that for this game. So it's not quite in the build yet. But actually, the procedural books are in. The library is not in just because we didn't get we have a tile artist who did this goat tile, and he didn't do. We're still waiting to put the actual library in the game. But the books just were in. We patch every week. We put them in this week. And yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be their utility is enough that we'll use them somewhere. It's very funny actually because I had this, I had this funny experience where I was putting in some procedural books, and then I was sort of horrified because I was like, wait a second, how is the player going to distinguish the procedural books from my awesome static books? And I realized that is like this microcosm for all of automation and the loss of my importance as the author. But oh well. Anything else? Yeah.
I just wanted to add something. The conversation about the maps being 2D, or I feel like you can still conceptualize a dungeon, I think, as
or like even a sequence of themed floors. So like even though the maps themselves would be 2D, I could see how you can structure it as like just a 1D chain.
Yeah.
There's a Doom level generator called Oblige, and over its many iterations, there was at some point a version where the level was created as a story, almost like a sentence. Player goes into this room, has option to go this way or this way. If they go this way, they find a key. It would start like you could generate that using this kind of similar technique. It would tell the story of the level, and then it would actually go back and generate the geometry from that after.
That's interesting. All right, anything else? All right, I'm Jason. Thank you.
I'm just gonna spend a few minutes doing some setup bits. Hi, Kawa again. I'm just going to do some quick Twitch setup things before our next talk. Actually, I think I put in time for a break at this point, so yeah, feel free to wander a bit. I will work on some techie stuff here, and we will be back.